Hello, good morning, everyone. Uh, Welcome to our guided course on Microsoft certification. Currently, we are pursuing exam AZ-204, which is a Microsoft certification on Azure, which is a Microsoft service. And this is our seventh session in the series. In this session, we will be covering on some services that are provided by Microsoft Azure, and this also falls that it will also help us in our AZ-204 exam. Uh, so moving on, I am Rishav Chatterjee. I am a developer, currently a developer in 3665 technologies, and I mainly work on SharePoint and .NET, which is JavaScript and C# framework stacks. In this session, we'll be covering how to implement secure cloud solutions. As Microsoft technical experts and offering consultation to various clients, we mainly work with cloud solutions with SharePoint and with having them stitched to a backend API and uh, deploying those APIs to Microsoft services like app services or serverless app services, and then also connecting them to SQL servers. So, we want to learn what Microsoft provides for us so that we can make those systems and solutions secure for our end customers. And there will be a Q&A session at the end of this session for any doubts that you may have. Reminding again, this is a seventh session in our Microsoft AZ-204 series, and the next session will be on implementing API management. On implementing cloud solutions. So, what is the objective of this session? In this session, we strive to learn how to securely deploy our apps in Azure. Uh, by apps, we mean like any framework apps, like it can be in Python, .NET, anything. Uh, we don't need to focus on the which framework the apps shall be. We are focusing on the deployment side and how we can secure it using Azure Key Vault, managed identities, and Azure App Configuration. And these are all Azure services which we can leverage to secure our apps and data, which is customer data that we use in our application. Some prerequisites for this course is listed here. If you even don't have them, we can go ahead and see the videos presented here, and we can pick them up if we deem fit that we can learn them. The first module in this session will be implementing Azure Key Vault. So what Azure Key Vault is, it is a service provided by Azure to keep and manage secret information for application. Secret information, by that we mean some passwords, certificates, or client secrets, secret strings that we have in our app or web config files in our .NET applications. Taking example, for now we say .NET application, but it can be any application of any framework. So Key Vault is used on that, and we will be covering why do we need Key Vault and what problems it strives to solve, and how we can implement it in Azure using Azure CLI, how to authenticate Key Vault in our application and stuff like that. Then we have managed identities and implementing Azure app configurations. So So starting on with Azure Key Vault. Uh, Starting with the benefits of Azure Key Vault, why we need them is uh, like the main functionality is secrets management. We generally need to store some tokens that is auto generated by our API side or by the backend logic of our application, or any password certificates, anything that or let's say we have user and encoded like user and their password hash or the password salt. Those are kind of secret thing that gets stored in SQL generally, and if any breach of security happens, that salt and password hash can be, even though they are encoded, but even then for a user getting access to their password salt and hash is a bit uh, a lapse in security. So we might want to use Azure Key Vaults to store those information, and by storing those information we can also tightly control who has access to those information by having tight authorization parameters. Like authorization and authentication is a key function of Azure Key Vault. By authentication we mean who the user is, like getting to like, the user like verifying if the user is what he says he is. So that is authentication. And by authorization we mean if the like after authentication comes authorization. So does the user have permission to access the files that they try to access? That is authorization. So those things are managed and managed by Key Vault itself. We don't have to do anything there. And the files and systems that they manage are, by example, are access tokens, again, which are like those tokens will be called by other APIs, like some bearer JWT tokens for accessing any data. So those kind of tokens can be stored in Azure Key Vault. Some passwords, certificates, API keys, uh, which are again auto-generated, or anything can be there. Those can be stored in Azure Key Vault. For key management, so creating and managing in key management is like creating of encryption key. So let's say a user tries to sign up for register or sign up for uh, a system or any application. So we don't usually store their password in our backend database. So that is a thing of the past, storing their plain text password that they enter. We usually encrypt that information, the password they entered, and we store their encryption key. So every time they again insert their password in while logging in, we like encrypt that and match if the hashes or like encrypted hashes are matching what we have in the backend. So that is called encryption. uh, that is also a service that is provided by Azure Key Vault resource. So they give us an option of creating and managing encryption key. Encryption key is a key which is used to encrypt the data, like how we saw, like visited the example of a user registering for the first time. So we can use the encryption key to encrypt that uh, plain text data what they have and store that encrypted data to Azure Key Vault or in our SQL, and the encryption key is also always present in Azure Key Vault. And then there is certificate management. Provision, manage and deploy public and private SSL and TSL certificates. Uh, we can create new certificates, we can manage them, and we can deploy it for any domains or websites that we have that we want to. That is also a function that is provided by Azure Key Vault. Like if a browser is not TLS, like it doesn't gets encrypted, then it is a very bad sign for the website. So we need certification management, and Azure Key Vault provides that for us. So these were some benefits of using Azure Key Vault. Then moving on to how to authenticate to Azure Key Vault. Like if we have an app service or an application, we want to uh, fetch the information that is stored in Key Vault. Like I have stored a key in Key Vault, but I also have to retrieve it, right? So if it is not retrievable, then it is of no use. Even like it can be of maximum security, but if I don't get the thing that I need in that time or moment, then it is a useless thing for me. So for that we have to get the information that is stored in Azure Key Vault. For that we have to authenticate our application so that Azure Key Vault knows who the user is and is the user has permissions to access the information that they want to access. We can do that by three different ways, which is managed identities for Azure resources. Managed identities is a we will be touching on it later on. It is also a service that is provided by Azure, and we can use that in our Azure Key Vault for authentication. Then we have service principal and certificate that is generated and store that can be stored in our application file in our web configs. So service principal and certificates gets regenerated every time, like they have some fixed time after which it gets changed or rotated. So new certificate is issued every for example, let's say 30 days, then we have to go to our app config and change it to the newest certificate that we have. If it is not done that way, then the access to Azure Key Vault is lost. So that is a manual process that we have, like people have to intervene to keep the app running for that. It is not auto managed. So service principal and certificate is a thing, and certificate is generated for any Azure Key Vault storage that is deployed. So we have to go there and we will see how that works. We have to go there and generate a certificate and service principal and store that in our app config. And this is a the service principal and secret option is also similar to the last option. So previously it was certificate, and there is a secret which is a secret string which will be used, and this secret string will also get rotated, and we have to change it every time it gets changed in our web config. So these are some ways we can authenticate to our Azure Key Vault account. Uh, Things to keep in mind when using Key Vault. To keep in mind, because the things we need to store in Key Vault will be of utmost importance to us, as it is a it has to be very secure, and we have to keep in mind some basic things that has to be there absolutely, so that no data is lost and no people don't get access to our secrets in which we stored in Key Vault. So first thing is we should use separate key vaults. Let's say we have 3 or 5 different resources or applications. So each of the 5 applications should have their own key vaults in which they store their secret, like information of connection strings, app certificate and secret keys, app secrets, and so on, so that none of the none of the application gets vulnerable if any one key vault is accessed. Like if I want to give a person access to a single key vault, they will not have access to all the application other 4 application secrets that we have. If they will get access to only one, and they can't change stuff there. So this is a very important thing, to use separate key vaults. Uh, some example for why should we use, let's say I have two application, and those two application tries to fetch data from two different databases, and those connection strings, secret connection strings, are stored in one place. So if a user, I want to give a user access to database application one and its app key vault. So if I store both the all the keys in a single key vault, they will get access to the second database also by the secrets that are stored for the second application to its database. So it should be avoided to restrict access to only those things that is absolutely needed. Next is control access to your vault. So that it is not public, at least we have to authorize users, and only authorized users should be able to access the vault. Then we have backup, which is, let's say we delete something or something gets deleted, we have an option to recover that. And it also gives us an option of soft delete by a recovery option. And logging should be turned on, so that if something who we can check who has accessed the secrets in a key vault, who has access to what, we can get those information if we turn on logging. In recovery option, we have a option of soft delete. So let's say somebody comes and deletes an entire key vault, then all the data that resides in the key vault will also get deleted. But by default, we have an option of soft delete on, and if we don't do anything, the default is 90 days. uh, why it is set to 90 days? Microsoft thinks that it is a long enough option to somebody to notice that a key vault was deleted if done unnoticingly, or uh, to cause harm to an organization. So it doesn't get deleted. And to fully delete an key vault or the keys, anything that is stored in a key vault, first we have to delete, and that will cause a soft delete. And then we have to delete from our archives. For that, we again need some more permissions and authentication and stuff. So that is some safeguards that Azure Key Vault provides for us, so that nothing uh, like bad happens. So now we're gonna see an example of how to create an Azure Key Vault first. So let's jump to our portal. By searching in here, we get an option of services. Under services, we have Azure Key Vault. So selecting that, we have an option of C create. Choose a subscription to free subscription. We create a new resource group. And this keyword name shall be unique. So even if we soft deleted some word, it has to be absolutely unique in our tenant level. just call it session vault. Choose the region to Central India. We can review what all information was selected and just hit clear. So here we have options of setting the keys, like generator, import keys, secrets, certificates, and we can use access policies to set who has the permission to get or fetch, delete anything in the access vault, key vault. So just to show how deletion works, this action will move the key vault and its contents to a soft deleted state, and it will have a recoverable and retention period of 90 days. So if we go ahead and delete them, we can just select the subscription for that cost. We have an option to recover the deleted key vault, and after 90 days it will get deleted from here also, and after that it will be non-recoverable. So if we notice that something is missing or an application cannot fetch key which is supposed to be there, we can always come here and see if it was deleted, and if you try to purge it, you won't be able to recover as a deleted. Now it is deleted from the system and I can't recover it anyways. Now we will be moving to Azure command line, and with it we will be seeing how we can create a key vault using command line, using Azure commands, and also set some keys in key vault and delete them after and fetch them after for use, and also delete the resource after it is used. So to start an Azure CLI, this is connecting to a terminal. Now I have been connected. So I have written some commands and just by this we are setting name for our key vault. This will be the name of our choice, which will be given to our key. This is the location that for key vault. create another resource group by this group create command, and we pass the name of our location and a name which is this is a JSON of properties of our resource group which was returned. It says type of resource groups. Now we go ahead and create it with Azure create Key Vault command. In the create Key Vault command, we pass the Key Vault name and the location and the resource group name which we just created, which is AZ-204 Vault RG resource group. The JSON format was returned. As we can see, the vault was created. We can go ahead and check that in our GUI tool. Take some time, I guess. This is the name of our key vault that we just created, and the resource group is AZ-204 Vault RG. We can see that there are no current keys that are available as we haven't assigned any yet or stored any. We will just do that now. So let's say we add a password for a user, which is just plain password values. We do that by selecting this command, getting this command. Command session was closed, so we have to redeclare the environment variable, or we can just paste, run the command like this, AZ Key Vault. Be stored as a secret. Set by vault name, the vault name that we just created. Any secret is a key value pair, of course, which is this is the key for the secret, and this will be the value. It returns the JSON for this key value secret pair that we just stored. Check in here that if the key was, it shall be, here is secrets, example, current version, it encrypts the password, plain text password, and stores it here. So we don't have to do that in SQL by ourselves. It manages the encryption with its own encryption key and stores that here, so that we can't see what the password was entered, but we can fetch the password by running this command show, and we pass the vault name and the key for the secret, which is example password. We run this, it gives us a value of mypass123, which is the value for our example password key. So this was how we can create a key vault using Azure CLI. This was Bash. We can do the same thing in PowerShell, and also set any secrets. That now we did set secrets here. We can also set keys by calling create key, and certificates also by Azure CLI, and configure them too. We also saw how we can't see what was the secret that was present, but we can call show method on Azure Key Vault secret show, and it will return with a JSON of value and the password. Now we will go ahead and clean the group, resource group, and delete everything in it. Now the resource group is deleted, and if we refresh, it shall be gone. And also check that by running the show command, if the resource is deleted, then it shall cause an error like just deleted, it has been soft deleted, so you can go ahead and bring it back from manage view. This was how we can set and retrieve secrets from Azure Key Vault. Next we have something called managed identities. This is something that is extremely useful, can be extremely useful for our day-to-day projects and that we do as Azure users, as we all like for people who are deploying and using Azure stuff. Azure gives us an option to manage the identities using this manage identity service. What it does is it provides identity for application which uses Azure Active Directory authentication. And again, after authentication, application can also use resources like Azure Key Vaults. We will go to details of what it means. So let's say an application is an API and it uses a SQL database. The API is stored in a hosted or deployed in a Azure app service, and the SQL API is also deployed in a Azure SQL database service, SQL database service. So both of them are an Azure resource. So what it does is, and the SQL database is of course authenticated by Azure Active Directory. We can use Azure Active Directory to uh, for the authenticating people to use, so that they can use the SQL in turn. Moving on, there are different types of managed identities, mainly two types. One is system assigned managed identity, which is enabled directly on Azure Service Instance. Uh, Next is user managed identity. It is created and assigned by users as a standalone Azure resource. What system assigned managed identity does is that it creates an identity for every resource that is generated or deployed. We can turn it on and it will create an identity, and that identity can be used to authenticate users. We will see it how it works and get a better understanding of that. And next is user assigned managed identity. In this, we have to go to identity uh, service in Microsoft Azure and generate or create a identity, and that identity has to be passed down to the service that requires it. So why do we need managed identities even? Uh, it absolutely resolves the problem of storing connection strings and app secrets or anything like that. So because SQL Server is a Azure SQL Server service, and the API is stored in Azure App Service, both of these are managed by Azure only. And the Active Directory authentication can be used to authenticate with, like, these two can talk between each other using Active Directory authentication, and we don't have to need to store the keys in web config for, like, the connection strings for the SQL database in our web config for an API, because if we can link the both of them in any way, we can do that seamlessly. So this is what Azure Identities tries to manage or solve. Sorry. So user assigned managed identity. Yeah. So we talked about how it was created by a user, and a user has to go ahead and uh, link that identity to a resource. So there are a concept of source and target in our system, that after this we can get things better. The source is, as I said, this can be any Azure resources from this chart. So if I ask a question of, I want to use an app using Azure virtual machines or Azure storage, these are the source applications. Like, let's say Azure App Services. So what App Services is, we store an API or a web application in Azure, deploy a web application Azure App Service. And what the target for an web application will be, like, from where the data from our web application will come from. So that we call a target, which will be our SQL server, our storage container, or our key vault. Those are the targets. By targets, what we mean is, those targets needs to have a system of authentication from our source. Like, the source has to get past an authentication barrier to access the data that is present in the target. As we already know in our web APIs or web applications, that we store the connection strings for our API SQL server. So SQL Server is a target. Our web API tries to get the data that is stored in the SQL Server or push some data that has to be stored in the SQL Server. So that is a target, the SQL Server, and to store or get data, we we uh, we store the connection strings in our sources application web configs or any file we store is at a string or XML document so that they can talk with each other. The target can authenticate the source and give it the data that it needs. So now what managed identity does is it is a the Azure itself will manage the authentication of source in the target. This is what the Azure portal or Azure identity service will manage the authentication of source with its target. Like who is the source uh, user? Like can the source use the target's data? We also have a concept of registering our application. We absolutely don't need that to register our application because it is not, and this is not something that is outside the scope of Azure resources. Because these are all services that are hosted in Microsoft Azure, we can use managed identities to leverage that functionality. So characteristics of managed identities, we try to differentiate between system and user assigned. It is quite important. So do we need system assigned managed identity or a user assigned one? So coming to creation, so creation, it is created as a standalone Azure resource for user assigned, and for system assigned, every resource that we create, let's say an app service or a VM, we have a choice of creating an identity for that. These are like this, how the identity is created. For system assigned, it is, or like for each resource, it has to be a single identity. Each resource will have its own identity. And for user assigned, we can create an identity, it is separate from the resource, and we can give the resource that identity to authenticate. So many different resources can have a single identity by using user assigned managed identities. The life cycle is, let's say we use system assigned managed identity. Shared life cycle is there with Azure resource that the managed identity is created with. When the parent resource is deleted, the managed identity is deleted as well, as it was created when the resource was born, and it will be deleted as well when the resource will be deleted. In system assigned, it is not that case. It is independent, it is separate, must be deleted separately as it was created separately. Sharing across Azure resources cannot be shared. It can only be associated with a single Azure resource. And for user assigned, it can be shared. The same user assigned managed identity can be associated with more than one Azure resource, as we talked earlier. So going to a graphical view, let's say this is a example of system assigned managed identity. So we have three separate applications, and it needs to talk to the SQL Azure SQL service. So it needs to authenticate itself to be called by the SQL server, and then for each SQL server, for each, let's say this is app service, we have the system assigned managed identity set for each of the resource. So we have three resources with identity for each one of them. But the redundancy here is that if we can notice, there are three identities separate for each of them, and they have to they are connecting to the same database. They are not connecting to different ones. Even because even then we are having three different system like managed identities. But if we use user assigned managed identities, we can create a single identity and assign that identity to each one of these source resource, and though that identity can be used by SQL to authenticate these resources, like this source resources, and exchange of data can start between them. Now we will be going to our Azure portal and see how we can create an identity. If we search manage identities, we get an option like this. So this is a tab, this is a service that is provided to create identity, and this identity is created in our Azure tenant, and any application that resides in this tenant can use this identity to authenticate to any uh, we will see to any target service. So there are two types of services, one is a source and one is a target. We have to somehow create a link between these. So if we create one, we will say session 7 demo. So I hit created, the identity will get created. This is our deployment is done. So this is a managed identity that we get, and we can see it has its own object principal object ID. So if we come here in our object ID, it is a separate resource that we have created. We search it. In our Active Directory, it gives us a option of my identity as an enterprise application. This is an Azure AD authentication scheme as it is present in here. We can select this and it will give us a line of application ID, object ID. We can assign users and groups, like so if we assign users and groups, and so only those users can get access to those identity sources that we set. So let's say again we deploy a target, uh, we deploy a target application, an app service. This is a target. This is, let's say, our example target service resource. be creating the app service. We review and create. .NET Core 3.4. Now let's say we create a target application, target resource. That would be a storage container, let's say. So we already have a storage container present. Yes, it gets deployed. Till then we can go over the storage container. So in storage container we have a thing called access control IAM, access control management, which is successful. So in access control management we have a role assignment. Uh, we have a role assignment, what, like a tab. Here we can assign people who can use this storage container, or you can see we can provision authorization to different people which are there in our organization. So let's say I search add role assignment. Enter. Select the role. Now when we select the role, we have an option to how we want to assign it to. Do we want user group or service principal? These are people in our application, in our organization. So, and we can set it one by one to give uh, this role to a single user, a group, or a service principal. And then we have a option of manage identity. By manage identity, this was what we were talking about. So if we uh, this is how the application will be assigned to this. The application will have access to this particular role. So for now, let's say we assign it to a user first. We select the user and review. This is how we set an uh, assignment to a particular role for a user. Now we review and assign. Now we can see this user can have read access to anything that this storage container has. So this is how we make a role assignment. But what about identity management? If we go to our successful deployment, here we have an option of identity. This is our app service that we just now deployed. So we can see it as it is a target resource. It has an option of identity, but in source resource, as our storage account was, we have an option of IAM, which is identity management. So how to set that up is go to identity, and we have a option of system assigned identity and user assigned identity in our app service. So if I turn on system assigned identity and save, so system assigned identity is where system will take care of the identity management, and we don't have to set identity among us. The resource is registered, the managed identity can be configured and allow access to other users. This is a object principal, same as we had in our identity management. For the type of, let's go to Active Directory. Here it comes as demo session 7, which is our app service. And for that app service, we are presented with this identity object. Now, let's say we go to our storage account and how to have a link between these two. We again go to access control IAM, and before we assigned a role to a particular user, by same thing we can do to a particular app service. Before it was read. Let's say I I want the app service to just have a blob read access, not any other type of data, file or other stuff, tables and queues. So we have this select this option of storage blob reader. Here we assign access assigned to manage identity, and now we have an option of system assigned identity, as we have selected manage identity, and this comes up, which is demo session 7. If we select it, then this app service will be authenticated for this storage account. This storage account will authenticate this app service to read only storage blobs, and we don't have to uh, include our storage accounts client secret keys in our app service code files. So if we review and assign, now it is set. So before, what we had to do is in our storage accounts we had to come here and use the access keys, which is show keys, the key and the connection string. We had to put these two string files in our web config, and by this we can would have been accessing the storage accounts. But now, as we are using managed identities, we can do that easily in the Azure portal itself, and we don't have to use it again and again. Like, we don't have to keep in our mind that this key will change or something like that. And this was this was system assigned key. We can also do the same thing with user assigned key. For that, we go to user assigned, we turn the system assigned off, or we can turn these both of them on at the same time. We can do that as per our needs as Azure administrators. Now, as it is disabled, the object ID which was generated in Active Directory identity is also gone. So let's say I go to user assigned and add, this my identity comes up, which I created. We have selected it. And as we can see, we can add multiple identities for our app service. Like, we have multiple connection strings and app settings, and those app settings in general can be used in those target uh, target resources. So again, coming here and giving access to this user created, user assigned key, go to access control, add a role, again a blob role, let's say blob reader. We use manage identities, set members. We have a user assigned identity key. We set it this. We select the identity, my identity, and we assign it. Now we added a role. So we can see here comes the my identity, and this one is not found because I turned it off. If you remember in our app service, this was system assigned identity key. As I turned it off, it got deleted from Azure AD uh, identity service, and so it says that it is not found now. But this one is, as it is separate from our app service, even if we delete the app service, this identity will not be deleted, as it is separate. We have not created the app service and the identity in the same resource. This my identity is separate from the session 7 app service. So I think this is a very good uh, feature that comes with Azure 8 Azure, as we already use Azure services for deployment of our applications and also for data stores with databases, SQL databases or NoSQL databases or storage accounts. We regularly use those. So I think this managed identity should be used for to manage our entities and do it securely, and we don't have to have the headache of changing web configs every time we deploy our app service, and it can get messed up sometimes. So this is a very good feature. So this was it for this session. Any questions?
Thank you, Rishabh. I think it was good insight for me to go through and one of the areas that I always wanted to learn. Of course, I'll come back because I'm going to give some of these options a try.
Sure, sir.
And
uh,